Hello folks, we're going to continue on here with the assembly of the front end on the YL1. We're going to pick up with installing the front wheel assembly. What you see in the video right now is the front axle, and I just dug this out of storage. A couple of things I want to talk about on this part. This axle assembly is no longer available from Yamaha. The spacer right here, this bushing, and the nut you can still buy new, but the axle itself is no longer available. You can find them on eBay, NOS. They're very expensive. They're not common, but you can find them. And you can find all kinds of used ones that are probably in worse shape than this one. My thinking in terms of this part, what I'm going to do is see if I can salvage it. It's got a little damage around the end here, as you can see. It's been deformed a little bit. I think what I'm going to do is chuck this up in my lathe, and I'm going to start with the least destructive process first, and that is, I think I'm going to use some emery paper and spin it in the chuck, see if I can get this to clean up a little bit. If I have to take a tool and make a couple of light passes across this, I can do so, and across maybe the end, because you can see it's been probably hit by someone with a hammer, or it's just road damage from thrashing the bike around off-road. But I'm going to first see if I can clean this up and make it look presentable, and polish it up a little bit, and then I'll probably end up replating this. The threads are good on it, the shaft is good on it, there's really nothing wrong with it, it's more of an aesthetic or appearance thing. So we'll see what we can do to clean this up. Probably do the same thing here with this spacer, put that in a lathe, and take a little emery paper, see if I can clean it up a bit, and probably end up replating that. In terms of the nut itself, this does have some damage to it as well, right there. And this, since you can buy it, I might even have one of these, I'm not sure yet. I'm probably not going to put much effort into restoring or saving this nut, but these two items, I know I can salvage this without a problem. It's a matter of how aesthetically pleasing I can make this, the end of this axle. So we're going to go ahead and get started with that in the lathe here directly. I got the axle chucked up in the little 3-jaw chuck. I'm going to use some 500 grit sandpaper to start seeing what I can do to clean this up. Again, I'm going to start with the least destructive and work to the most aggressive. Wouldn't be surprised if I don't have to put a tool in my lathe here, make a few passes to clean this up. I also put a little light 3-in-1 oil on here just as a little lubricant. You'll also notice I took my ring and watches off, or watch off. I don't wear any jewelry, nor do I have long sleeves on when I work with a lathe. It's a very dangerous condition to have jewelry and long sleeves on when you're working around a lathe. So we'll go ahead and see what we can do here. I think I'm going to touch it up a little bit with a file. I ran the 500 grit around it a few times, and for the majority of the axle here, it did okay, but right here, it's a little rough yet. So I'm going to touch it with a file under speed here, under power, just a little bit, and then I'll come back to it with the sandpaper. I'm going to make a facing cut across the end here, and then clean up this chamfer just ever so slightly. Just made contact. I'm going to lock my carriage. So now if I have to control any infeed, it'll be done with the cross slide. Here's the front axle. I did turn this end down as far as I dared. I think you can see that I didn't quite get all the damage out of it. And I did face it. That is, I went across the end of it. You see a little bit of a scar right there. But this has not been replated. So this and the spacer or collar, I also put that in a lathe. I didn't turn it, I just polished it. This is raw steel. Both of these right now are raw steel. So if I didn't do anything with them, they would rust very quickly. They're very susceptible now to rust. Conversely, these brake arms are not, because they have zinc plating on them. So even though this looks good, it's not the final condition or surface finish. You'll note on this bushing or spacer, I didn't quite get all of the grooves out of it, or groove. I didn't want to go any smaller with it, and again, I did not use a tool. I just used emery paper, 500 grit paper, because if I turned it too far down, I was afraid it wouldn't want to fit tightly into the seal. It fits into a cone-shaped seal, something like that. So I didn't want to go any further with it, and this groove will fit in the seal anyway. It's really more of a dust seal than anything, but so these two parts now will go into the plating bath, and they'll be zinc plated and then tumble polished, and I'll bring you back when I've got those ready to go. Well, here's the original front axle. I just finished plating it and cleaning it, and here's the bushing or spacer, I think as Yamaha calls it. These are the same parts, just been replated with zinc. I hand cleaned these and polished them after they were plated, rather than throwing them in my tumbler. Usually if I've got multiple parts to polish, I'll throw them in my tumbler and let them run for a day or two. But since I just had these two pieces, I just hand polished them. So you can see that they're the finish. Didn't come out too bad. Again, these are the original pieces. Now we'll go ahead and get on with installation. We're going to go ahead now and install the front wheel into the front forks. You can see I've got everything laid out and prepared to make it easier when I get into the actual installation. Installing forks, wheels in the front forks can be a little bit fiddly, so my advice is to pre-prepare everything ahead of time. For instance, this front pinch bolt and washer, which by the way are new, those are brand new from Yamaha. I chased the thread in here where this bolt threads into to make sure there was no paint buildup and it was nice and clean. I chased the thread on this threaded portion on the end of the axle so that threads on nice and easy. I put anti-seize on the pinch bolt as I was preparing to thread it in, so that's already been prepared. Those kind of things I'd recommend you do ahead of time and get everything ready to go. Get your tools laid out, get your sockets ready to go, everything you think you're going to need. Nothing's worse than getting into the middle of something and you're trying to get things to align and it's fighting you because it won't fit. So prepare it ahead of time, it'll just make it that much easier. I have not fit this wheel yet, so you'll see it first time it's actually going together, but I did prepare everything as best I could. A couple other comments, you'll see I pulled the original tape off the lowers of the fork tubes, the painted portion here, and retaped them with the tape running vertically. That will make it easier to pull the tape off rather than trying to unwind it and work around the spokes. You can just pull it vertically. And I did that on both sides, and obviously the tape is just to protect the painted portion of the lower tubes. The front axle bolt, this is a new nut right here. This was the original. I bought 2 new ones off of eBay. And by the way, the parts diagram from Yamaha is incorrect for this nut. It calls out the incorrect nut. And I had to do a little research to determine what the right part number was so that I could track them down on eBay. They were readily available, not from eBay, or not from Yamaha rather, but only from eBay. So what I'm going to do now is I've got the wheel just placed in between the forks. I brought the front of the motorcycle up so that the axle approximates the center line here of where the axle will go through. And the center line of the fork the axle goes through will line up with the center of the wheel hub. I'm going to go ahead now and add a little anti-seize to the end of the threads here, and we'll go ahead and see if we can't get this put back together. I will be torquing these axle bolts when we're done. They roughly fit the brake shoe backing plate in place so that the notch in the backing plate aligns with the block welded onto the bottom of the lower fork tube. Now I'm going to reposition the camera around the other side because we have to insert the axle from the left through to the right side. This spacer or bushing you've seen before, and this will fit down in between the lower fork tube and that black seal in the hub. See if I can do this without blocking the camera. Now we're just going to slide Now we're going to go ahead and slide the axle through, tap it with this mallet. Make sure everything's aligned on the opposite side. And you can see here, I think, that the threads came out on the opposite side. I'm going to take a new axle nut. There is no lock washer. Get that started. And we're going to start to snug it up. Now there is a hole in this end of this axle. I think you can see it right here on my left thumb. You can put a rod through that and hold that while you torque that in place. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to torque this axle nut first, then I'm going to come back around and I'll torque this pinch bolt here. Now the torque on these two bolts is two different things. This is a 8mm bolt. The axle is 10mm, and this calls for 10 foot-pounds of torque. That is the pinch bolt. The axle nut calls for 31 foot-pounds. I'm not going to go that high on either one of them because I've used anti-seize, and it's not going to be ridden to speak of. So I think on the pinch bolt I'm going to go about 8 foot-pounds, and on the axle bolt, or nut rather, here on the right side I'm going to go to 25 foot-pounds. Turn this around so that I can get at it. I'm going to take a brass rod. This might not be quite stiff enough, but I think it'll fit through okay. And see if I can bring that end of that axle here on the right side up to about 25 foot-pounds. I'm going to first set my torque wrench to 10 and get a feel for how it goes. That one pretty easy. Now I'm going to move up to 20. Give that a shot and see how that feels. When I torque bolts, nuts and bolts, I go as much by feel as anything else, besides what the tool is telling me. I want to get a feel what it's like. Okay, that's 20. Now we'll go up to 25, which I'm intending to be the final setting here. Okay, so we've got the axle bolt torqued to 25 foot-pounds, which would be plenty adequate for the usage of this project. Now I'm going to torque the pinch bolt, the lower tube pinch bolt, to 8 foot-pounds. I have to switch to a different torque wrench because my other one, my larger one, won't go low enough for the torque that I'm going to apply to this bolt. So again, I'm going to go in 2 phases. I'm going to initially go to 50 inch-pounds. Where I really want to end up is at 96 inch-pounds, not foot-pounds. So I've made the conversion because this works in inch-pounds, not foot-pounds. Okay, that's 50. This is 80. $96. And there we have it. We have the front wheels installed. Both pinch bolt and the axle bolt on the outside have been torqued. So I will not have to worry about coming back to those. You will notice I did not put the brake cam arm on. I'll do that later on when I get to the point of putting on the cables. And I think I have to track down the bolt that locates or holds that anyway. So even though that's ready to go and polished, I do have to sort out the hardware, and I'll worry about that in another time, another place. But at this point, the front wheel is installed and secured. And we can move on next, I believe, to the finish up the center stand spring, the return spring or the retracting spring, and getting on with the rear swing arm, inserting on the rear wheel. So that's it for this video. Installing the front wheel is a pretty basic and simple process, though it can be a little fiddly. This one wasn't bad. One thing I find curious about this is Yamaha did not put a hole in the end of the axle rod for a cotter pin or a split pin, which is very common in later years for safety reasons. I found that interesting, but nonetheless, that's the way it came apart. That's the way the parts diagrams show it, so that's how I put it back together. That's it for this video, folks. Any issues, questions, or thoughts, feel free to drop me a comment below. And as usual, thanks for watching.